government even as a young person. Always wanted to be on some committee at school, and always wanted to be involved with people. Being the oldest, I became like the mom, and I always taught school, and maybe that's what thrust me into education. So before I went into public office, after I graduated from Tennessee State University, I did choose education with a political science minor. I came to Flint to set my roots and love this city. I thought it's small, but I'll be here for a period of time and then I'll leave. But because of what Flint had to offer at that time, I decided I'm going to stay here, and I'm glad I did, because I eventually met my husband, and we were married, and we have 2 children. So I began to be involved, actually, before I was married, in issues of the community. I tutored children, number one, and that's a part of giving your service. I joined several organizations among NAACP and Urban League, just getting involved. Business Professional Women's Club, and I was always interested in government. And I can remember when my husband first was elected to the city council, I enjoyed just going to the city council meetings and watching the process and saying maybe one day I would do this too. But it was not until I formed a committee, it was in the 90s, not in the 90s, probably was in the 80s, to mourn and recognize the death. And you were too young for that, but there were a lot of young black boys that were being killed in Atlanta, Georgia. And it was so shocking because you didn't know if you woke up the next morning if another one had been found floating in the river. And people who were connected to children, there was a definite sadness. And so as a non-elected person, I called together some ministers and asked them, would they help me to give honor to these young boys that were being killed, to let Flint exhale and mourn, because everyone was talking about it. So we had this big gathering at Vernon Chapel, AME Church, a community gathering where we paid homage to those young boys that were being killed. It was like it was one every 2 weeks or something. And so that was the beginning of my being a real community person, bringing a group together. And then 32 years as a classroom teacher, loved that. Started off at Northwestern High School, and then I ended my career at Flint Schools of Choice. So I've had an interesting beginning.
Well, let's go back to what you're most known for. That's your state rep position.
Okay.
What legislation?
What do you think?
What legislation have you proposed that you would like our viewers to know about? What are you most familiar, or what you are what you're known for as being a state representative?
Well, what I'm known for. I've introduced or sponsored several bills, many in education, many in public service, and particularly those bills that had to do with children. One of my bills that I'm most proud of came about because one afternoon I had a young man to come into my classroom who I had begun to have conversation with. He was really, really very sad that day. And I watched the dynamics of his body language. He was very uncomfortable. He had not zeroed in on me at all in terms of listening to what I had to say today. It was like he was in another world. So I asked him to step outside. I said, something is wrong with you. Let's go outside, because I always respected the privacy of my students. I said, we need to talk. And I asked him, I said, what is wrong? Something is awfully wrong with you today. You're sad. You're not participating. He said, well, Mrs. Clack, when I come to school next week, and I remember he said, on a Tuesday, I'm going to have a suitcase. And I don't know where I'm going to live after that. I said, what do you mean? And this young man was one of the most well-groomed young men I had as a student. Very courteous, kind, a handsome young man. Always with a smile, but he was not smiling that day. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, you don't know it, but I'm a foster child. I said, I did not know that, because you had this picture of a foster child. And he said, I am. He said, but when I come, my foster mother said, I'll be 18 next Tuesday, and I have to leave the house. And I said, what do you mean just leave the house? He said, that's what happens when you're 18 and the state no longer pays for you, you have to leave. And I thought that was the most cruel thing I had heard, because this young man was the kind of son I would want to have. And for him to be out on the street was just unconscionable to me. And I said, I'm going to see what I can do for you. And I did. I was able to get him in a shelter. But see, that was not enough. He needed, at that point, he was immature. He needed assistance and guidance. And I swore then at that point that if I'm ever in a position to help a foster child, that I will. And who knows, because 2 years later, I was running for the House of Representatives. And that was one of the first bills that I introduced. It actually took 6 years because Democrats were not in majority, and many of our bills were being shoved aside. This was a major bill dealing with a human being and the right to just survive and have some type of support. But the bill was passed once the Dems came into the majority, and I was chair of this major committee, Family and Children's Services. The bill was in my committee. And so I had an opportunity at that point to pass that bill with him in my heart and on my mind, that I'm doing this because of what you did, and other young men and women who know that they're being shifted out of a house now will have an opportunity, because the bill addressed the issues of becoming independent, but with support, and you could stay in the system until you're age 21 if you're in school. If not, until age 20. But you had to work. You had to show some responsibility. But see, that meant the system was now going to change. And these young people, men and young women, who might have gone into the correctional system, would have a chance not to go. And it was just that important to me. So I was really happy about that.
Okay.
And of course, the smoking ban bill, there had been an attempt for 20 years to get it passed out of the House. I was able to do that, and I'm very proud of that. It got to the Senate, they sat on it, but for 20 years they couldn't even get it out of the House. I've had several bills. In Flint, I was co-sponsor of a major bill having to do with providing we call it the Promise Zone, which was marketed after the Kalamazoo Promise. And it's going to be the Flint Promise, to educate children at risk, to provide tuition for them to go to college. And we haven't gotten it off the ground, but the bill was passed. Everyone's looking at Kalamazoo, because Kalamazoo, this bill was so important in Kalamazoo that was passed some years ago. You had people to come from other countries because they knew that their child could get an education in Kalamazoo. All they had to do was move there, and they'd get an education. So,
well, let's stay on the tone of education. Flint schools are facing some very challenging times. Budget deficits, decrease in enrollment. If you are elected to office, what will you do to help or collaborate? What will your administration do to collaborate with those Flint
and that's
schools?
the key. That's the key, because they both are separate governmental entities. The Flint school system has a budget based on the number of students that attend school every day. There is 2 counts that's done. There are 2 counts that's done every year, and the monies that are appropriated are based on the number of students that we have in school. So, even though they're separate entities, they must come together, especially in this city, if we're to survive. Business looks at 2 things when they look at a city. They look at the grade scores, the educational system. They also look, of course, at the potential for business in that community. But education plays a role. What type of community is this? And the grade scores of school children is so important, because if you're going to entice families to move into our community, they want to know what type of school system is there for me to move into that system. So I, as mayor, as you mentioned, we have to collaborate. We must know what's going on between the 2 entities, because it is important to know, because there is some assistance. We've got after-school programs that come through Community Block Grant Development, and that is important in terms of establishing some type of rapport between the communities and the school. So there will be collaboration in my administration.
Job creation. You did speak of jobs and businesses.
Oh,
if
yes.
you are elected into the office, what will you do to bring